Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Rereads channel. Today's video, we're doing Tyrion 12, A Clash of Kings. It's a very short chapter, but it's one of the most iconic chapters, I think, of A Clash of Kings. It's the one I think about when we talk about A Clash of Kings for Tyrion, outside of the Battle of the Blackwater, of course. But this chapter is very instrumental into A Storm of Swords. A lot of the reasons why Tyrion is blamed for Joffrey's death, it really happens in this chapter. The reason Tyrion is put on trial for a number of things, and all these people telling about how he's such a horrible person, a lot of that stems from this chapter. And of course, it really stems from a lot of A Clash of Kings and what Tyrion does, but especially this chapter. Tyrion gets into a very dark side of himself, which we can totally understand why he's saying the things he does, but it paints him in a really bad light, and it's kind of weird because really this whole sequence of this chapter is Cersei and Tyrion's dinner scene. And Cersei already hates Tyrion, but it kind of fuels everything of why Cersei hates him. You think about A Feast for Crows and we learn about Cersei and her motivations. A lot of that's going to be confirmed in this chapter. Like, this is the moment in which Cersei is like gung-ho against Tyrion now, really for the rest of the story. So let's not waste any more time and get into page 581. Pod dresses Tyrion in a crimson velvet tunic and brings him his chain of office, but Tyrion decides to leave the chain aside to avoid provoking Cersei. This is going to be a very tense situation. We haven't seen Tyrion and Cersei interact really since Tyrion made his move in capturing Tommen more or less and having him under Jaqen Bywater's protection, all that kind of stuff. This is kind of our first meeting since that point, and there's been these indications. Like Tyrion, with the last time he talked to Cersei, he kind of felt like there was something wrong. Cersei seemed to be in a very good mood, and that's really because of this chapter. She believes she's found Tyrion's lover, and so that's all going to play out here in this chapter. But before Tyrion can go to this dinner, Varys intercepts him with a parchment from the north. Tyrion reads and learns that Bran and Rickon Stark are dead, reflecting on the wolves howling when Bran fell. He wonders if the wolves howl again now. Varys insists that the news is grievously sad, but I do want to say this. It's very interesting the way that George gives us news of things happening in Westeros. Like, yes, it's implied that in the last Theon chapter, some people are going to die. Is that actually going to be Bran and Rickon that are going to die? No. If you're a pretty, detailed reader, you'll understand Theon didn't actually kill Bran and Rickon. But on your first read, or maybe first time watching the show, you might not know what happened to Bran and Rickon, and so you might think they actually are dead. So it's interesting the way that Tyrion is our first chapter in which we learn that information. It's not through Catelyn, it's not through any of the other Stark POVs. It's through Tyrion. It's really interesting the way that George does that. Tyrion asks if anyone else knows this information, but Varys says no, not yet. Tyrion decides he will tell Cersei himself, given they're going to dinner anyway, and is eager to see her reaction, because there's a lot of interesting points here. Tyrion, remember, he got arrested because Catelyn believed that Tyrion had basically sent the whole assassination catspaw on Bran, and so that's why Tyrion was arrested. So Tyrion has a very deep connection to this. Tyrion does want to figure out who sent this assassin and all that kind of stuff. And so when he does talk about this with Cersei, he's going to be very interested to see what her reaction is, given the fact that maybe Cersei wanted Bran dead. And that's going to be a big talking point of really the next page or two. We then skip to Tyrion and Cersei's dinner scene as Cersei appears especially beautiful that night in a deep green velvet gown that matches her eyes, her golden hair loose over her shoulders, and a jeweled emerald belt at her waist. It's very weird the way Tyrion describes Cersei. One thing that's very prevalent throughout the first 3 books and becomes even more prevalent in book 5 is the fact that Tyrion has this very weird incesty view of Cersei. Like, he very much, it seems like, has an attraction and wants to sleep with her, but they're also siblings, so it's really weird, and it's hard to read sometimes. As we get into page 582, Tyrion waits until he is seated and has wine before handing Cersei the letter in silence. He says nothing, but only intently looks to her reaction. Cersei reads it and reacts sourly, as Tyrion says she did want Bran dead, but she instead says that she blames Jaime for Bran's fall, saying he acted for love, but foolishly and dangerously. And there really was no winning situation when you look at Bran discovering Jaime and Cersei together, because even if Cersei had done what she says she was going to do, that she could have intimidated the boy to never say anything or any of that idea, or maybe even explain that what they were doing wasn't like sex or anything like that. I don't know, because it'd still be a very uneasy feeling you would have, because at any moment if Bran described what happened, Cersei and Jaime would be in a really bad place, and that could be exposed to the public. But the way Jaime handles it as well, it's like you pushed him off the tower expecting him to die. He doesn't die, and so there's a lingering like, okay, well, what if he remembers or tells someone? So, in reality, as horrible as this is to say, if Jaime wanted to silence Bran, he should have just probably, like, just killed him, just in general. But that would also bring up a lot of susness to it, so I don't know. There's a lot there with that whole situation that no matter what you do, it has an issue. Like, the tower doesn't guarantee that Bran is going to fall, so he could be a lingering threat. But also, you can just say that he fell. It's not like this big cover-up you would have to do. There's just a natural explanation for it. But either way, she insists the Stark boys' deaths are Greyjoy's doing and not hers, trying to just get away from anything dealing with that. And Tyrion warns that Catelyn might retaliate by killing Jaime. Ironic, given that Catelyn's last chapter actually follows this chapter, and it's very interesting because the way that George leaves that point of view is you're not actually certain whether Catelyn kills Jaime or whether she's going to free him, and you don't really find anything of that out and really until the next book. But it is interesting because Catelyn, in her grief, could do that. She could kill Jaime because of what's happened to Bran and Rickon and all that kind of stuff. But Cersei clings to Sansa's leverage, but Tyrion reminds her they both must keep the girl safe. And the other part of this is they can't really let it out that they don't have Arya either, because then it makes it even worse. But yeah, they're in a tough position. If Sansa was to die, Jaime most certainly will die. They turn to supper, having chestnut soup, bread, greens with apples and pine nuts, lamprey pie, honeyed ham, buttered carrots, beans with bacon, and roast swan with mushroom oyster stuffing. It sounds like a very extravagant dinner, and I can tell George was hungry. Tyrion is on his best behavior at dinner, offering her the best portions and only eating what she eats, wary of possible poison, very similar to what we see Roose doing at Winterfell in Book 5, but it makes sense. You know, Cersei has a bad reputation of killing political rivals, all this kind of stuff, and even though Tyrion doesn't maybe believe that she would poison him, he's still wary of it. Like, there's this underlying tension that's growing each and every chapter, because Tyrion feels like, yes, he feels comfortable enough, but he also feels that there's something, like, not quite right about this dinner. It seems to be going a little too well. But Tyrion does notice how the news of the Starks has, in a lot of ways, soured Cersei's mood. Cersei then changes the subject, asking anxiously if there's word from Bitterbridge, but Tyrion says none. She voices distrust of Littlefinger, fearing he might betray them for Stannis. And this is how you can tell Cersei is not a great player of the game at times. Why would Littlefinger betray them for Stannis? Like, Stannis would not keep Littlefinger in his post. In a lot of ways, Littlefinger would lose a ton, maybe even his head, if Stannis became king. There's no reason for Littlefinger to betray them for Stannis. If anything, Littlefinger is going to wait out what's going to happen at the Blackwater and then kind of, go from there. That's what I would think Littlefinger would do if he wasn't to get the Tyrells to jump in bed with the Lannisters. Tyrion dismisses the idea, noting that Stannis cannot be bought and wouldn't suit Peter's ambitions, which is true. Cersei then changes the subject again, noting Lady Tanda provided the ham as a bribe alongside her plea for leave to return to her castle. She doesn't want to be trapped in King's Landing when Stannis attacks. That could lead to some really bad things happening, as we're reminded of, the first sack of King's Landing with Tywin. Cersei suspects that Tanda fears Tyrion might arrest her as he did Lord Giles. And a lot of people are probably thinking Tyrion's arresting lords now that are just going, home, that they're leaving the castle. It's putting a lot of fear into the people of King's Landing, especially the upper class now. As we get into page 583, Tyrion suggests Lady Tanda should bring her garrison from Stokeworth if she wants safety instead of fleeing. And for Tyrion, this is a brilliant idea. If anything, just boost up the amount of men they have defending the castle. Cersei grows testy, though, questioning why he sent away the mountain clans. Tyrion explains they are better used in guerrilla raids in the Kingswood, not disciplined battles on the walls. And we've talked about this really in the last Sansa and Tyrion chapter about the rationale of sending the mountain clansmen out there. makes way more sense than keeping them at King's Landing. Over roast swan, Cersei asks about the Antler Men conspiracy, as she seems more annoyed than frightened. Tyrion says they are more or less just acting on who they think is going to win. They are hedging their bets and placing their bets on Stannis because they think he's going to win. It isn't necessarily about the Lannisters slighting them or any of that kind of stuff. It's more to do with the Lannisters are seen as the losing side as of right now. He calls them fools as well as traitors. Cersei asks if they've all been caught, and Tyrion says Varys assures him so, though he distrusts the swan's richness. Cersei then gives Tyrion some wisdom, saying she warns him not to trust Varys, saying the eunuch plays all sides, as he once convinced her he was her only friend at court. And we've seen this throughout 2 books. Varys is helpful to everyone to feel like they're dependent on him. We saw this with Ned. We see this really exclusively with Tyrion. Varys is somebody that is trying to keep his position, and his position is only kept if he's valuable to everyone, bringing them, rumors and all this information with spies and all that kind of stuff. Varys has made himself to where he can't be replaced. And if he ever was, they would not do nearly as good of a job as he would. And that's kind of what Cersei is telling him, is that Varys is willing to help everyone, but only far enough that they feel like that Varys feels like he won't be removed from office. It's kind of what Cersei's telling him. And it's funny given how much Varys has exposed Cersei on things and how much really Varys has also leaked information to Cersei, as we're going to see here. As she brings up Varys' report that Tyrion wants the Hound taken from Joffrey. Tyrion curses Varys inwardly, saying he needs Clegane for leading sorties, not babysitting Joffrey. And we can definitely see the wisdom in this. Why waste the Hound just guarding the king who's not even going to be in the battle, really? He's just going to be watching from the back, kind of like how Tywin would. So why would you waste the Hound for that? And it's something where if you're Cersei, you're kind of blinded by the idea that you've been given this prophecy that all your children are going to die before you, and the fact that Tyrion has been acting against her pretty much the entire time he's been at King's Landing. And you think about the ideas swirling of, okay, Tyrion can put Tommen on the throne once Joffrey is dead, and he can rule through Tommen. All of that's playing through Cersei's mind, and you can totally understand why Cersei comes to the rationale that she does, that Tyrion is trying to get Joffrey killed. Tyrion, though, replies that the king will have Osmond Kettleblack and Meryn Trant at his side, while better men like Balon Swan and the Hound must command attacks to keep Stannis off their side of the river. It totally makes sense, but for Cersei, she's more worried about Joffrey's safety than she actually is the battle. And what's crazy is, like, if they lose the battle, Joffrey's going to die anyway. So you need to use your men to the best of their ability. It's just not what Cersei's doing. She's blinded by her hatred for her brother and the mistrust that she has of Tyrion. Cersei claims Jaime would have led the sorties himself, but Tyrion retorts that he's in Riverrun, and Tyrion's not that person. Tyrion's not a warrior. He's not like that. But this is a bit of foreshadowing that Tyrion will have to do that during the battle. So it's a nice little bit of foreshadowing, while also just being a line that is kind of obvious. Like, yeah, Tyrion doesn't do that kind of stuff, but Jaime would, of course. Cersei then objects that Joffrey is only a boy, but Tyrion argues Joffrey must be seen at the battle, even if kept from danger, since soldiers fight harder for a king who shares their peril than for one who hides behind his mother's skirts. Now, I'll say this. That's totally correct. If you're a person that's a soldier, and, you're scared, you're nervous, you feel like you might die during the battle, if you see a king that's willing to also fight and potentially die for your cause, you're going to fight a lot harder than somebody that's not even being seen on the battlefield, that's not there, he's just using his men and all this kind of stuff. Tyrion is totally right in what he's doing with Joffrey. He doesn't need to have Joffrey in the front lines, but he needs to be there as a show of power and force. It's the same idea of like Tywin, And that's what Tyrion's trying to get to, but Cersei, all she can see in her head is Joffrey being at the front of, a battle or whatever, which is not the case at all. As we get into page 584, Tyrion argues that Joffrey should be allowed to play the part of the king in the coming battle, recalling Jaime's prowess at 13. Now it's like Tyrion's time to do exactly what Cersei did, where Cersei compared Tyrion to Jaime in terms of they should be able to lead their own men. Now Tyrion's throwing that right back at Cersei, saying Joffrey should be just like Jaime, being able to fight, all that kind of stuff. But that just isn't the case. He promises Cersei the boy will wear the best armor, be surrounded by guards, and be pulled back to the Red Keep if danger grows. But Cersei shows no reassurance and asks if the city will fall. Tyrion says no, but prays they can hold the Red Keep if needed until Tywin can relieve them. And that is clearly a likelihood at this point, that King's Landing is going to fall. Stannis has way more men. He's a better general than Tyrion is. He has better, more hardened men for battle. Everything is looking like it's going to go Stannis' way, and that's kind of what Cersei's realizing at this point, as they've heard no word of Tywin at this point, and Littlefinger's also gone radio silent as well. She accuses him of lying to her before, but Tyrion says he only lies for good reasons and wants trust between the two of them. As a gesture, he offers to release Lord Giles and return Sir Boros Blunt. Cersei doesn't really care about Boros, but tries to bring up Tommen, and this is where she gets nothing. Tyrion is using Tommen as a chess piece against Cersei. Tyrion refuses to move Tommen from Lord Jaqen's protection, saying he's safer there. And the truth is, he probably is, but at the same time, Tyrion is also using Tommen against Cersei. If Cersei does something, well, Tyrion is the one who has control of Tommen. The servants clear away the untouched swan and bring blackberry tarts. Cersei begins to speak of Varys, calling him dangerous because he doesn't have a cock. And this is where the tension of the chapter boils over. And Cersei is now willing to play the Game of Thrones more or less. Tyrion jests back that neither do you in terms of having a cock, and thinks how much she hates that. And we know this is the truth. In A Feast for Crows, Cersei constantly brings up the fact that she wishes she was a man so people would, treat her with respect and all that kind of stuff. Cersei warns she may be dangerous too, and mocks men for letting their worms do their thinking, which Cersei's not totally wrong on. And even remember the last chapter we had with Cersei where she's telling Sansa that love is a poison and it can be used as his big weakness, and she even points out Tyrion specifically, and so this is where all of that's going to boil over. Tyrion then senses something outside the door and regrets coming alone. Tyrion is worrying, is Cersei going to put him in prison? Is she going to have him killed for things that he's done? But Cersei then leans forward provocatively. I want to say this, Tyrion once again, in a tense moment, is looking at his sister's boobs. Kind of weird, but whatever. Cersei then says she is not interested in his manhood, but in who he puts it in, revealing she does not rely on Varys for all of her secrets. She ends by telling Tyrion that she has his little whore, and for Tyrion, this is a huge shock. Tyrion instantly thinks that Cersei's talking about Shae, of course, because that is his actual love, but we know that's not going to be the case. As we get into page 585, Tyrion reaches for his wine to steady himself, while Cersei continues pressing about his bedmate. Tyrion has nothing that he can really do. He doesn't want to say anything to confirm that it is Shae, so he can't really react to the situation yet. He was going to try to more or less emulate his father during this whole confrontation, and is going to want to see her. Cersei taunts him about her, asking if he's married her, and jokes their father will be relieved. Tyrion panics inwardly, fearing Varys or some other spy has revealed Shae's identity, even in his reckless, midnight gallop to go see Shae, that might have been his undoing. But Cersei then accuses Tyrion of scheming against her, selling Myrcella, stealing Tommen, and plotting to have Joffrey killed to rule through Tommen. And you can understand why Cersei thinks that. Think about the situation she's in. She started the book with all three of her children being in King's Landing. Now one of them got shipped to Dorne to try and make an alliance there, and we know why Tyrion did that. It made total sense. It was a great political move, but still, this is Cersei's daughter. You then have Tommen, who's been kidnapped by Tyrion and his goons, more or less, and now Joffrey is being put on the battlefield. You can see all the pieces that Cersei's putting in her head. She's blinded by this prophecy that she believes Tyrion is going to have all three of her children killed and or use them. Tyrion tries to downplay this, insisting that Stannis' attack is imminent and that Cersei needs him, but she mocks his usefulness and his sellswords. And I will say this, if Cersei was to say imprison Tyrion or kill him here, everything would go bad, because Tyrion has been putting all these things in place that if Cersei was to take over, it wouldn't go as well. But Cersei admits she thought of killing Tyrion, but says Jaime would never forgive her. And we know that to be the case, but think about how quickly that's going to flip. It establishes a lot of things right away. Jaime freeing Tyrion later on is kind of foreshadowed by this line. Also makes sense because Cersei is going to have Tyrion killed more or less in the next book. She threatens the girl's life if anything happens to her sons, promising a far worse fate than death should the boys be endangered, speaking on Tommen or Joffrey. Tyrion protests that the boys are his blood and asks what kind of man she takes him for. Cersei sneers that he's small and twisted, and this is where everything's going to flip. So Tyrion has been kind of playing like the brotherly figure to Cersei. Now he's going to play the stone cold Tywin card on Cersei. The thing that Cersei tries to emulate so much but always seems to fail. Tyrion is going to give a very haunting couple speeches here. He's going to kind of show himself as the monster that people perceive him to be. Tyrion tries to think what Jaime would do, likely killing Cersei or whoever got in his way, but instead he needs to be as immovable as Tywin and Casterly Rock. Tyrion asks to see the girl as she might have killed Shae already and orders the door opened. "Bring in my brother's whore," is what Cersei says. And at this, we get a huge revelation in page 586 that the girl is not even Shae. It's Alea. I struggle on pronunciation and words, and somebody will definitely tell me in the comments, but I tried my best. Sir Osmond's brothers, Osney and Osford Kettleblack, drag in the girl Tyrion thinks is his lover as she is gagged, bound, and bloodied. Cersei blandly explains that she fought, but the whore will live so long as Joffrey does. And this is the thing. Why should you treat Tommen well if, if Tyrion's love is being beaten and all this other stuff? Tyrion hides his relief and rage, realizing Cersei has the wrong woman and that the Kettleblacks are fools. He coldly demands Cersei swear she will release the girl after the battle, but Cersei says she will if Tyrion releases Tommen. And I will say this, Tyrion at this point is playing the role perfectly. He's totally got Cersei bought in that this is actually his love, and Tyrion continues playing that role as we get one of the darkest, I think, moments of the series when Tyrion does this. He warns Cersei that whatever happens to her happens to Tommen, including beatings and sexual assaults, adopting his father's hard tone. And this gets Cersei off guard completely. She never even thought that Tyrion would do something as cruel as that to Tommen. She protests that he wouldn't dare, but Tyrion smiles, that monstrous smile to Cersei, and says he would do it himself. Could you imagine the television version of Tyrion saying that? There's a reason that Alt-Shift-X's video on Tyrion is so great, because Tyrion is this villainous character at times, and he plays that up. He's not a hero. He's a morally gray character, and we know that Tyrion doesn't intend to actually do any of these things. But even speaking it into existence, it changes how people perceive Tyrion, and Cersei specifically. There's a reason Cersei turns to Tyrion being the one that killed Joffrey, let alone he does look guilty. It's also the idea of there's already this issue between the two that is really culminated from this line. Cersei tried to strike Tyrion, but he seizes her wrist, bending it back until she cries out and shoves her to the floor when Osfrid moves. He orders the Kettleblacks to untie the girl and remove her gag. Her hands cut off from blood by the ropes hurt as the circulation returns as Tyrion massages her fingers gently and apologizes. And this is that moment where now Tyrion has fought back against Cersei, telling her he'll never slap him again and all this other stuff, showing that Tyrion can be this monstrous figure that he's kind of shown to be in the next book. But Tyrion also needs to play the role and act like he really cares about the girl. The girl says she knows he will free her, but Tyrion promises he will. She kisses him on the brow, leaving a smear of blood as Tyrion thinks to himself that she would have never been hurt but for him. And that's the truth. Because of the whole Shae issue, now other people are being harmed. Because of Tyrion's blindness and everything he does for Shae, other people are being harmed. As we get into page 587, Tyrion then utters probably one of his most iconic lines, where he tells Cersei that he'll hurt her someday. He doesn't know when, but he will, and he vows revenge as Cersei orders him out. I remember watching this on the show for the first time in the sequence. The wording's a little changed, but it is, to me, one of my favorite dialogue moments of the entire series, both in the book and the show. And just the delivery of the line by Peter Dinklage in the show, you got to give credit to George and his writing here. And this moment, it's so important for Storm of Swords. The reasons why I love A Clash of Kings so much is because it's able to tell its own narrative while also setting everything up perfectly for a Storm of Swords. A Storm of Swords is not as great as it is if it isn't for this book. This book sets up. This is like the journey to then getting to the payoff in the next book. Cersei then orders him out, and he bows, wishes her pleasant dreams, and departs with the weight of the evening on him. Tyrion in a lot of ways compares this to like a battlefield, and how his father had told him, once that other army breaks, it doesn't matter. Even if they're stronger, have more men than you, the battle is over. And that's the way Tyrion feels. He feels like he's beaten Cersei here for a number of reasons, because Cersei has the wrong woman. Tyrion climbs back to the Tower of the Hand, aching, and sends Pod for wine. In his bedchamber, Shae is waiting, completely nude except for a heavy golden chain of linked hands across her breasts. She jokes about wanting him and his hands on her, and about the cold gold chain. And this is so important because this is so much on the nose foreshadowing to when Tyrion will kill Shae in the next book. It's beautiful the way George writes this chapter because it oozes with foreshadowing. It just oozes with everything that's going to come. Tyrion struggles with what to tell Shae about Alea, taking the beating meant for her and the danger that still threatens if Joffrey dies. He wipes the blood from his brow and begins to explain that Lady Lawless, but Shae interrupts. Shae mocks that Lady Lawless is as lazy and describes her as constantly sleeping and eating. She mentions Lawless is pregnant, which Tyrion had asked if she was sick or something along those lines. Tyrion asks how Shae enters his chamber and to show him the hidden door. And so a lot of things to process here. One of those, I feel bad for Lawless because, she went through an extremely traumatic event during the riot of King's Landing. I feel really bad for her, to be honest. And the way that she's treated by other people, all that kind of stuff. But it brings up the point where we have even more foreshadowing to the end of Storm of Swords, that there is a hidden door within the Tower of the Hand, and there are passages that maybe Tyrion will use in the future. Shae says Varys hooded her and that she could only see a sliver of the tiled floor, and thinks that the mosaic depicted a dragon as we get into page 588. Shae told Tyrion that she had been taken down a ladder through a long tunnel and past an iron gate before passing the dragon mosaic. She said then they went up another ladder into a low tunnel where even Varys had to crawl. And this is huge because this is going to be the exact route that Tyrion will take in A Storm of Swords, and it's just setting that up for later. Tyrion searched his chamber for a hidden passage. He twisted a loose sconce and tried the wardrobe panel, but nothing yielded. And this is even more concerning if you are Tyrion, because now you know Varys has direct access to your chamber. He could very easily be listening on every single conversation you have, and also, even more importantly, it makes you think about Ned as well. That Varys the whole time could have been spying on him through the walls, all that kind of stuff. It's really interesting the way that this chapter builds on more of that as we continue on and get to the end of the chapter. He also tugged at a stone by the window seat, again without result, leaving him frustrated. Shae pressed him to bed her, undressing and pulling him close, but his manhood failed him. She attempted to arouse him with her mouth, but he remained soft. Tyrion was too stressed out for pleasure and all this stuff. Everything was getting to him. When she asked what was wrong, Tyrion thought bitterly that she was no innocent, despite her expression. It's Tyrion where every time he has these sexual encounters with Shae, he knows this is wrong. He knows that she's just a whore. She doesn't actually love him. She loves his gold and the status that he can give her. And he still can't stop being with her because he has this feeling of wanting love so badly that he's blinded by even the warning signs that his head tells him. He urged her to sleep, stroking her hair long after Shae slept, and Tyrion lay awake beside her, hand resting on her breast, listening to her breathing. And that is the end of Tyrion 12. This is a very good chapter. I think it's one of the best of this book. Specifically, I have it very highly rated as I've been re-updating my Clash of Kings rankings, and we're winding down towards the end of the book. I mean, Catelyn's going to have her last chapter of the book in next week's video, which is depressing to me because I love Catelyn's POVs, and the fact that we're going to be done with 2 books for her, and we only have 1 book left, which is a very depressing read for Catelyn, given it's really the downfall of both her and Robb. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to doing next week's video. I mean, I am because the chapter's great, but it's also a very sombering feeling. It's the same idea that I got when we started to get towards the end of Ned's chapters in book 1, where once we started getting to like Ned's coups, like it was getting very close to the end for the character. And I've talked about this a lot. When we get to the Red Wedding, it's gonna be a very emotional chapter, and especially when you dove into these characters so much, talk about them every week, whole nother thing. But this is the last Tyrion chapter we will have before we get into really the Battle of the Blackwater. We're going to have a Catelyn chapter, and then I believe we have a Sansa chapter after that, and then we head into the Battle of Blackwater with Davos. So really looking forward to the next couple chapters. They're all fantastic, and I hope you guys all enjoyed this one, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.